Okay, we are in Genesis chapter 40 tonight. The end of Genesis is almost in sight. I know it's a long ways off. Still, it is a big book. Wally and Thelma say hello. Hello to Wally and Thelma. Prayers with and for you and both of you. Hope. Robin is here. That's good. We now have almost as many people online with the PD Robin Winters Facebook login as we have here. But we'll take it. Got a few folks, one folk in particular, out with an impending routine, but prep heavy procedure coming up. So I will not reveal Mark's identity in saying this. So hope it goes well for Mark. Hope he has not too rough a night. So it's no fun. Glad he's getting it done though. Genesis chapter 40, we'll start by reading verses 1 through 8. Then it came about after these things, the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was furious with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. So he put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard in the jail, the same place where Joseph was imprisoned. The captain of the bodyguard put Joseph in charge of them, and he took care of them, and they were in confinement for some time. Then the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt were confined in jail. Both had a dream the same night, each man with his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning and observed them, behold, they were dejected. He asked Pharaoh's officials who were with him in confinement in his master's house, why are your faces so sad today? They said to him, we have had a dream, and there is no one to interpret it. Then Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell it to me, please. Okay. Any thoughts on the first 8 verses of Genesis chapter 40?
Well, we really haven't gotten into too much except for the fact that Joseph makes it clear up front that he's not, that God is the interpreter, not him.
Yeah, Joseph is the vessel by which God will pour out a blessing on these two individuals. It is certainly kind of the setup to the heart of the story, but does give us a little insight into life at the time. I mean, it's probably a big honor to work that closely to Pharaoh, to be either his chief cupbearer or his chief baker. But you also, when you draw the attention of someone with that kind of power, you are subject to their whim and caprice too. And when they get offended, you start throwing people in jail. Sometimes you start with the people that are closest to you. And this story doesn't really weigh in at all on the comparative guilt or fault or whatever lands these guys in prison. They just go there because that's Pharaoh's desire. And sometimes today we hear the term due process thrown around, and from my experience in education, the concept of due process is kind of a relative one, and it depends on exactly what the government is trying to do to you, what process to you is due. Now, incarceration without the specific naming of a charge and without representation and without going before a judge for a long period of time, that's pretty much a denial of due process. I mean, they didn't get any process. They got sent directly to jail. But they, in a sense, you could say God was looking out for them because he put them in the same jail with Joseph. And as we saw at the end of Genesis 39, Joseph has really been put in charge of the jail. So they are under his direct care as he is imprisoned. And as PD knows, and if TJ was here, he could tell you that when you're in jail, you are particularly vulnerable. You don't have the right to really defend yourself or protect yourself because of whatever offense you have been at least charged with and perhaps convicted of. And it's up to the jail keepers to take care of you and protect you. I think most jail keepers caring for the inmates is probably not the top priority. Their top priority is not probably getting killed by any of the inmates. But Joseph, we see this concern. I mean, they're put into his custody, and he takes it as a responsibility. I have to care for these men as long as they're in my custody, even though I'm a prisoner too. While a prisoner, I have been entrusted with the well-being, the lives and well-being of these two men and other men, presumably. And it's my responsibility to care for them. And, I saw a politician tweet out this week that America has a real bad under-incarceration problem. And I'm not going to name his name. I strongly disagree with his assessment. We have something like 4% of the global population and well over 20% of the world's incarcerated population. So we're 5 times more people incarcerated than we make up in the world, the rate of incarceration. So we got a lot of people in prison. Maybe we're not putting the right people in prison. I don't know, but we put a lot of folks in prison, and I just wonder what our culture and our society would look like if those who went to prison, instead of encountering kind of the typical or what we think of, I'm sure TJ and PD could both kind of correct some of our preconceptions about prison. But what if when someone went into prison, the people that were put over you cared about you like this? Cared about, and I'm sure some of them do, but what if this was the dominant impact that they had in the lives of their prisoners? Was concern, was care. Not just for their physical well-being. Joseph cared for them because they have long faces, because they are dejected, because they appear stressed. I mean, we admire Joseph, and Joseph is an admirable character. He's not flawless, but he's very admirable. But we don't talk about that part of it very often. At least I haven't heard it discussed. That people put in his custody, even if they're prisoners, he cares about them. And he treats them well, and he inquires after their well-being. So we see Joseph is a vessel of blessing upon these two men. Most of you, I'm sure, have read the story, and you know the outcome is good for one and not so good for the other. But that's kind of up to God to judge, perhaps, and certainly up to Pharaoh. He has a say in it. But as far as Joseph is concerned, so as far as the man of God is concerned, these men have come under his care, and he's going to take good care of them, the best care he can under the circumstances. And I think it's just another aspect of the nobility of Joseph to see this concern for people who are on the outs. Now, certainly, as we will see, Joseph has his own agenda, but he does not withhold care or withhold blessing to further his own agenda. He goes ahead and renders the care and renders the blessing that God has given him for these people. Ultimately, both dreams that we will see about are blessings, and both interpretations are blessings from God, in a way. even if they're difficult, even if they're challenging. So, any other thoughts on verses 1 through 8 before we get going? Mindy says hello. Hi, Mindy. Glad you're safe and sound after all the traveling you've been doing. Okay, let's look at verses 9 through 15 now. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream, behold, there was a vine in front of me. And on the vine there were 3 branches. And as it was budding, blossoms came out, and its clusters produced ripe grapes. Now Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, so I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I put the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Then Joseph said to him, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore to you your office, and you will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand, according to your former custom when you were his cupbearer. Only keep me in mind when it goes well with you, and please do me a kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this house. For I was in fact kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even there I have done nothing that they should have put me into the dungeon. Okay, what do we think about the first dream here, the dream of the cupbearer? How so? And we don't know exactly. It just said that they offended their Lord, meaning Pharaoh, not the real Lord, but the God of Egypt, which is Pharaoh. And it's one of those things where whatever he did to offend him, either it wasn't that Pharaoh got over it, or he was later acquitted. Maybe Pharaoh realized that he wasn't responsible for it. Well, I believe, I didn't look this up, this just came to me, but when Paul is traveling by ship and the ship is wrecked, the guards are of a mind to kill all of the people, all the prisoners on the ship, lest they escape onto land and run amok, I guess. Paul has not been convicted of anything. In fact, it is said that before his shipwreck, that if he had not appealed to Caesar, he would have gone free. So the ship is wrecked. They're going to kill all the people on there, whether or not they've even been convicted of any crime whatsoever. And that's just kind of the thing. I mean, if there's a jail in prison, like where PD and TJ work, you've already been convicted or you're not there. You also already been processed and all that. Gone through the diagnostic unit in Shelton, and et cetera, et cetera. But if you're working at a county jail and there's some kind of problem, if maybe, let's say the jail catches on fire, do the guards just go in and start shooting the inmates?
Well, they're obviously under a different contract than what these guys were with. Yeah.
That's so. It just shows, I think, the vulnerability of people in a tyrannical governmental situation where one person who thinks he's a god gets to make whatever decisions he wants, and they're fully implemented at the moment. The fact that they went to prison rather than just being summarily executed was probably a sign of grace, a gift, a blessing. When you're sitting in prison, you may not feel like that, but you could have been dead already. And one of the things that is going on in the story that kind of keeps coming up is this idea of being having your head lifted up. Both the cupbearer and the baker will have their heads lifted up. And in this case, it's a good thing. Your head will be lifted up and you will be restored to your office. You will get back what you lost. My guess, he's not going to get any real compensation for being wrongfully imprisoned or anything like that. He's just going to, move on with life. You have to just walk out and start over. But it just shows, in a sense, the power that Pharaoh has. And later on, the power that Pharaoh is going to give Joseph. And so when his brothers come before him, you think Pharaoh's going to care if his number 2 guy puts a bunch of Hebrews coming out of nowhere, a bunch of hillbilly rednecks riding in? You think he's going to care if Joseph has these guys killed? You think he's going to care if Joseph has them thrown in prison and forgets all about them? This is the power. I mean, it is absolute. You give somebody this power, it's going to be abused at times. And I think you can see Joseph. I mean, certainly he had a right under the law, under the Mosaic law, which he was not really under, but again, the readers would have understood it under the Mosaic law. Kidnapping is a capital offense. He could have had his brothers killed and been justified technically under the law because they kidnapped him. And it certainly would have been a matter of very little consequence to a Pharaoh who his number 2 guy kills, especially when it's not a citizen or a fellow noble or anything like that. It's just a bunch of foreigners, a bunch of immigrants, undocumented, coming into the country, begging for welfare, basically. They'll pay for it, but they're still going to be taking food away from the Egyptians, aren't they? That's what they came for. So the cupbearer gets his head lifted up. You're going to be restored to your office. And then Joseph seeks his own well-being. He advocates for himself. And, we coming off the most recent holiday and everything, we see the sacrifice of Jesus. And in that context, he is a lamb led to slaughter. He is silent before the shearers and all that. But, he didn't mind at times advocating for his own well-being, advocating for his own desires. I mean, he asked God to have the cup taken away from him. I mean, that's advocating for himself. He shows up, and there's Zacchaeus, who was a wee little man, up in the sycamore tree, and says, I'm going to your house today. He invites himself over to Zacchaeus' home. It's a blessing. And, Jesus, and as an example in life, there are times when we do have to advocate for ourselves. Paul certainly advocated for himself. Paul advocated for himself in his appeal to Caesar. Paul advocates for himself to the churches against and over his critics. Paul advocates for himself. So there's a time and place for everything, and there is a time to be willing to make the ultimate sacrifice, to just lay down your life. But there's also a time, and there's nothing wrong with, if you're unjustly imprisoned, to try to get out of prison. And yes, you could do the work of the Lord while you're there, just as Joseph is doing, but there's nothing wrong with. And I think if you're justly in prison, but you change and you've got a new heart, a new life, and a new outlook on life, try to get parole, try to get pardoned, try to get commuted, whatever, There's nothing wrong with trying to get and experience more personal liberty, so it really allows you to do more for God. But Joseph isn't ashamed or afraid to advocate for himself in this plan. We know that it doesn't really work out too well, but that's what Joseph is doing. So they have dreams, and they're kind of, in a sense, similar dreams in a way, but this first dream is a message of life. You're going to live in 3 days. You'll be telling jokes. You'll be laughing, around the campfire with all your buddies about this in 3 days. Maybe not, but you'll be getting back to your normal life here shortly. They've already been in prison, it says, some time, so it's not like it was a brief stay. It was whenever Pharaoh got around to it, basically, or whenever. I think in the context of this story, we can see God moving, and this is God getting Pharaoh ready to act a certain way. Okay, any other thoughts before we move on from verse 15?
Rick, it's interesting that you said there's a time and a place for advocating for yourself. Well, Joseph apparently knew this was the time and place. He hasn't heard the baker's dream yet, so he's asking the cupbearer to remember him. Not, it just kind of struck me that that plea didn't go to both men, just the one that was going to have the positive outcome, have that good standing with Pharaoh. So
And presumably, he doesn't know the interpretation of the dream of the baker yet because he hasn't heard it.
right.
As this vessel of blessing, who's to say exactly how God functions? But he has heard the dream of the cupbearer and has poured out God's interpretation. This isn't Joseph's interpretation, but it comes from Joseph, and Joseph uses it as an opportunity to advocate for himself. Robert, did you have something?
Well, that was the question I was going to ask. It seems like, if I'm remembering incorrectly, anytime we see a prophet of God give an interpretation of something from God, I can't recall ever known how did, well, there might be a few times where there's the angel spoken. How did they get that interpretation so they can present it? That's the question I have in my mind, because it shows that, Joseph has this connection with God, but is it a personal thing? Is it something that he has to pray about to get this interpretation? We don't know, as far as I can tell from this. It's just interesting to me. How do these people know? They do, they know. And the proof of it, I guess, is it happened the way he.
The story does not contain any indication that once Joseph hears the story, he goes off by himself and prays, and a vision comes to him revealing it. The story indicates that he gets told a story and he has the accurate response to it. He's given what he is supposed to say in this really difficult situation, and that's part of the gift that God has done. There's no delay in the response in the story. God gave this man a dream as a gift, as a blessing, and he's giving him the interpretation, the story, in the context of the story, immediately as a blessing as well. And it is good news for the man. It's a message of life, the image of living vines bearing live grapes. My mom used to keep a bowl of delicious looking grapes on I think it was on her dining table. I think we always ate at the kitchen table, but we had a dining table, because we're American, you never eat at the dining table, you always eat in the kitchen. On Thanksgiving or something like that, but maybe it was on a coffee table, I don't remember. But those were not really tasty grapes. In fact, they tasted like plastic because that's what they were. So they look great, and that's these are not plastic grapes. These are real grapes. They're giving forth juice. They're giving forth life, and this is a message. Everything about this message is about life. A vine, branches that are budding, grapes with juice in them. This is life. An image, a very vivid image of life for the cupbearer. Now we come to.
The reason I raised the question today, throughout history, we've had people saying, this is what's going to happen because God has told me. So they are trying to present themselves as the prophet of God. So as we read this, we see a true prophet of God that tells you what the dreams are. So is there something there that we can learn about a true prophet versus who is not true from this story?
We-
The fact that it happened the way he said it. He said it's gonna happen this way.
And the fulfillment, it is a prophecy. It is a predictive prophecy. Not all prophecies are predictive, but this one is a predictive prophecy, and the predictions are very specific. 3 days, not again the magic number of 3 days. 3 days, and you'll be restored, and you'll be back as the chief cupbearer. And that's the prediction, and that's what comes through. A lot of predictive prophecies are pretty vague, and they are fulfilled from a manner of perspective, from a way of looking at it. This is how, some of the messianic prophecies that are given regarding Solomon and Jesus, in some ways, it's kind of hard to see their precise fulfillment working on both, because Solomon and Jesus are kind of, in many ways, very different from one another. They're both sons of David, but as far as we know, one was very chaste throughout his life, and one was not so chaste throughout his life. So and the complications that came along with that. So yes, it's a prophecy. It's a predictive prophecy. It's a specific, short-term, prophecy. This is going to be 3 days. Now, 3 days in an Egyptian jail might not seem short-term if you're the one doing it, but in the context of the story, they've already been there a long time. It's almost over. It's kind of the message. Okay, let's go 16 through 19, and we'll see the other dream. When the chief baker saw that he had interpreted favorably, he said to Joseph, I also saw in my dream, and behold, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. And in the top basket there were some of all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, and the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. Then Joseph answered and said, this is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. So far, so good. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you, and you will hang on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off you. Takes kind of a dark turn there at the end, doesn't it? He tells, it's kind of cruel. You tell the cupbearer, the Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. Pharaoh will lift up your head and basically separate it from the rest of your body. You're going to get a head up here, buddy. And the image, in a sense, is the imagery. You're in 3 baskets, 3 days. Bread, in a sense, is very much an image of life in the Bible, isn't it? I mean, God sustains his people by giving them bread in the wilderness. But this is baked goods for Pharaoh. These are the things Pharaoh likes, the things Pharaoh seeks out. This is the food of Pharaoh, not the food from God. And in that sense, it is not an image of life. It is not the bread of life. It's the bread of the God of Egypt rather than the bread of the true and living God. And just as the birds consume the bread off of his head, they will consume the flesh off of his body. He's going to be hanged. Body's going to be left up there. It's not just a way of killing you. It's a way of making a statement. This is what happens to bakers who don't wash their hands before they knead the dough or whatever. Use too much salt. I don't know what he did wrong, but he's getting eaten. He's going to have the flesh of his body eaten off of his bones. And not a very heartwarming prospect, but in its own way, it is a blessing. The dream and the interpretation are in their own way a blessing. They're hard blessings. They're unpleasant blessings. But they're the truth. Now, this is what's going to happen to you. He's waking this baker up from any sin. I mean, the baker sees this other interpretation and says, oh, well, let me tell you mine. He's all excited. You got good news for the other guy. You think you're going to get good news too. When I practiced law as an attorney, people would come to me sometimes and say, my kid has been charged with this crime. I saw this other kid charged with the same crime, and they didn't do anything to him. And you even see it today. I don't know what's going to happen if this police officer in Minnesota is acquitted. And I'm not saying what should happen to him. I don't know. I haven't watched 1 second of the case. So I don't have an opinion on what happens to him. I have a fear about what will happen if he isn't convicted. And I've never really gotten to see Minneapolis. I've been through the airport one time. I heard it was a nice town. It may not be so nice this time next week if he's acquitted of his crime. And at the same time, you can't blame him and his attorneys for seeking the most favorable outcome they can for him. And you can't blame the family of the decedent for wanting justice, whatever that is, for their dearly departed. So, tough situation for sure. But looking at other cases, this happens sometimes. Whenever you have one criminal convicted of a certain level of crime and enduring severe punishment, and then someone else convicted of a crime that sounds somewhat similar or maybe even worse, and they basically walk. But we have different judicial systems, don't we? We have the state court. This is a state court decision in Minnesota, in my understanding. I guess since he's law enforcement, it could be potentially in federal court. But a lot of the cases, it's different jurisdictions, different judges, and if you have a jury trial, 12 different people every time. So, get enthusiastic at your own peril, I guess, is what I'm saying. Get your hopes up at your own peril. Joseph pops of any balloon he has, any hope he has of having his life restored to him. But just like when you're maybe really sick and you go to the doctor and the doctor gives you really bad news about the outcome and the treatments and all that stuff, is he being mean to you? Or is he being as kind as anyone can under the circumstances and telling you, this is it, and it's going to hurt, and there's nothing we can do for you?
He's giving you the opportunity to get prepared.
He has 3 days to get prepared to meet his maker, whatever else he knows about it. And he also has those 3 days with Joseph, too. If he can swallow this very bitter pill, he can look at the one who gave the interpretation from God and work through all this. I mean, a man who cares about him and a man of God who cares about him. In the story, it's kind of set up as almost humorous because of the turn of phrase. Pharaoh is going to lift your head up on a gallows. That's how he's going to lift you up. And but in reality, if you put the story in the context of actual human beings talking to one another, a man of God has talked to you, has told you the truth. How are you going to respond to it? And really, there's nothing he can do about it. I mean, if I was the baker at this point, I'd be trying to bust out of jail. Probably that would be my all the incentive I needed to try to do that. Maybe that's obviously impossible, and he's just if that's the case, certainly even more incentive to try to get right with God. But hard news, truthful news. There's a proverb that says the wounds of a friend can be trusted. When someone who really cares about you hurts you, there's a reason, and a reliable reason. Now, most people who hurt you don't care about you. They're hurting you to advance their own agenda. And if you don't really know someone, if you're not really their friend, if you're not really close to them, it's probably not your place to inflict that wound. It's not your place to be the bubble burster. Let them have their bubble. But when it's someone close to you, someone invested in you, someone who wants good things for you has to give you hard news, you can usually take that hard news to the bank. Learn from it, grow from it. Joseph isn't maybe that close, but he certainly cares about this man. Wants to give him the best future he can. It gives him the most blessing he can get. The dream is a blessing. The interpretation of the dream is a blessing. It's just not the outcome he wants to experience. So the heads are lifted up one way or the other. We'll read verses 20 through 23 and wrap this up pretty quickly. Thus it came about on the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the cupbearer, to his office and put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. He hanged the chief baker just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. This forgetting of Joseph is a problem Egypt has in Exodus chapter 1. They forgot Joseph, did not know Joseph. And as a result, it goes poorly for the Hebrews at first and then ultimately for the Egyptians. But just a couple of thoughts to wrap it up on. There's a lot of psychoanalysts, and I'm not trying to belittle that practice at all. I think mental health is a very important issue. Whatever your thoughts on gun control are, when someone goes into a grocery store and just starts shooting, there's almost assuredly a mental health issue at work there as well. And and that kind of happens a little too often these days. Once is too often. But mental health is real. Mental health issues are real. People die from mental health issues every day. A lot of people die from it. I don't know what our suicide rate and how that compares to the rest of the civilized world, but it's probably would make us all sick to hear about it. So mental health issues are real. And I think dreams sometimes are our subconscious, our minds, working through whatever's going on in our life. And maybe in an allegorical way, maybe in a very literal way, but they're kind of, your brain is defragging, to borrow an old computer. I don't know if computers get defragged now or not. Robert could tell us about that, I guess. But your brain is kind of working through all these things that are going on in your life sometimes. And that's kind of what works out. And a lot of people take those dreams to their therapist or whoever, and there is some study in that. Now, that's not what these dreams are, though, are they? They're not working through their past issues. It's about their future. And really the dreams, while they are a blessing to the men who have them, and the interpretations are blessings to the men who have them, really God is at work here for the benefit of Joseph, for the benefit of believers. To show God is with Joseph. Even when he's in prison, God is with Joseph. And while the cupbearer forgets him right now, the cupbearer will remember him later. It's not yet time, according to God's time, for Joseph to come out of prison yet. And it will be more impactful. Wouldn't it be more impactful if the cupbearer went straight to Pharaoh and said, now that you let me out of the joint, I got a favor to ask. And he's just already given him a big favor. But it's when Pharaoh is in distress. That's the time. When Joseph blesses Pharaoh, things start really happening. And Joseph, maybe the cupbearer can get Joseph out of the joint, but he's not going to get him to the top of Egypt right now. He's lucky he got out of the joint. When Pharaoh is distressed, Joseph walks out of the prison. Basically, right now, it's like walking out of the Washington State Penitentiary and walking right into the governor's mansion. They got a helicopter waiting for you. They're going to fly you to Olympia. Or they've got Marine One out there. They're going to fly you to the airport, put you on Air Force One, and fly you to the White House. There's plenty of guys in the Washington State Penitentiary right now that would like that outcome. I think it would be a big improvement in their situation. I don't think any of them are going to get it. But he goes from worst to first. He just, from the outhouse to the penthouse. And that's what God has in mind for Joseph. Not to get out, not to go back to his brothers, not to live a normal life, What are the dreams Joseph had? What about his dreams? His dreams are that the sun and moon and stars are all bowing down to him. His dream points towards preeminence over everyone, even, to a man at that time to be preeminent over your own father. That is like unimaginable that your father is bowing down to you. Honor your father and mother, not father, honor your son. So Joseph's dreams are still alive. They're not being fulfilled yet, but they're still alive, and God is moving to make them happen in a way that not even Joseph can imagine. And at this point, probably not even Joseph wants. Joseph would probably just rather get out of jail. But that's not what God's about. So Joseph's dreams are still out there, and Joseph's dreams will be, the dreamer will have his dreams realized. Okay. That's all I have for tonight. Mr. Kelso, will you lead us in a closing